Okay, so we're back for chapter 2 of The Princes of Serendip, and we'll probably get about half the chapter in this video, and then there'll be a chapter 2 part 2 to come after that. So to catch you up, this wise king of Serendip has sent his 3 sons into the world in search of a formula for dispelling dragons from the waters surrounding his island kingdom of Serendip. And the sons have left the royal township of Anuradhapura and are preparing to actually leave the Serendip itself. And here we go. Chapter 2, The Lost Camel. The 3 princes slipped away from Serendip on a bright and singing day. Before their ship was far from land, however, gray clouds were marching overhead, and sharp winds whipped the sea into furious billows. Between the surging peaks, the 3 young men saw dark and threatening shapes, monstrous heads, and lashing tails. With tremendous force these struck against the small vessel. It tossed from side to side, now up, now down, then nearly over, but the 3 brothers showed no fear. They took long oars, and with these tried to strike down the ugly dragons in the sea. Every blow, however, fell only into yielding foam. The scaly monsters still leapt and dodged among the waves. "Death to dragons," said Balakrama, a little out of breath. "We must find as soon as possible." His brothers agreed. Therefore, once arrived on land and having purchased horses, the princes made haste to visit all the learned men they could find. Some of these, so aged they could barely smile, just put a finger to their lips and shook their heads. Others pondered aloud but gave no real answer. Then one night, as the brothers rode through the high lands of the Sheras, they came to a village where they learned of an old and noted sage. They asked the way to his house, and a group of men and children brought them directly to the philosopher's doorway. He sat as still as sleep, and yet his eyes were open. The brothers, dismounting from their horses, bowed with great respect. "Pray tell us," Balakrama said, "if from your wisdom store you can furnish us with an old lost formula by ancients known as death to dragons." At these words the sage looked up and said, 100 lines it has, but there is one and only one lone copy of the total formula in all the world." Feeling his heart dance within him, Balakrama said quickly, "And where, pray, may that be?" "Who knows? Alas," the philosopher replied, "it is possessed by a strange and ancient seer with eyes that dart like sudden flame. By some he's called Ephenicius. Ephenicius. So closely does he guard the scroll on which the formula is written, that he travels in 100 guises, at times invisible. Rarely does he stay more than 1 day and night in a single place. As for the verses, it is said that these are carried in a cylinder of silver, closed tightly at both ends. Many kings have tried to buy its contents, but to all who ask, Athenum will only say, 'Death to dragons may not be sold, death to dragons may not be bought.'" "But you," Balakrama said, "have you ever looked upon the seer yourself?" "I have," the sage replied. "Once, long before the moon grew old, he came this way and stopped a single night beneath my roof. Well, I knew the fabled scroll was somewhere hidden on his person, but dared not ask to see it." Then suddenly the philosopher looked hard at the princes. "And why do you 3, he said in a stern voice, "ask about this magic thing?" The brothers explained that they sought to rid the sea around their island home of monstrous dragons. At this the old man waved away the other people and invited the 3 princes to step into his house. There he spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "Although I never saw even the cylinder of silver, the night that Athenum rested here, I heard him saying verses in his sleep. Only 2 lines were said distinctly, but these I noted down. He opened a small cabinet and took therefrom some old dried leaves of the talipot palm. On one of these was written, "Though the treasure saline be, you will not scoop it from the sea." Hastily, Balakrama made a copy of those 2 lines. Then the 3 brothers thanked the gentle sage and continued on their way, wondering more than ever how the formula could be secured. One morning shortly after, as they traveled slowly toward the north and west, the princes were overtaken by a messenger from Serendip. "What news? What news?" asked all of them at once. "Your Highnesses," the man replied, bowing very respectfully, "I regret to bear you word that our noble king has fallen ill." The brothers were distressed and much alarmed. They longed to go back to Serendip at once, but alas, they had no permission to return. So Balakrama composed a letter to be taken to King Jaya. In it the princes told of their sorrow at his illness. Then, recounting all that had happened, they sent him the 2 strange lines of the verse which they had found. "Since the rest is so closely guarded," the letter said, "and even were it found, cannot be purchased, we entreat your majesty to let us now return to Serendip. There we could drive the dragons from our shores with shining swords." Afterwards, though hopeful that they soon would journey home, the 3 young men set out once more upon their search. They traveled slowly, and the sun rose and set for many days and many nights, and then at last they came to the land of Persia. A vast country of both deserts and mountains, it was ruled by a powerful emperor whose name was Bahram. Near its borders, the brothers sold the horses upon which they'd been traveling. In their place they purchased camels for the journey which lay ahead across the desert. Mounted upon these they set out for the imperial capital at Bishapur. One morning in the desert they noticed great streaks of dried salt glistening in the sunlight, left behind perhaps by some long-gone ocean. Balakrama thought of the 2 lines of the verse. "Here is salt, not in the sea, but on the land," he said. "Can this be what the verses speak of?" His brothers could not tell. Traveling still further, they saw here and there trees of wild pistachio with old and twisted trunks, and in time the foothills of a lofty mountain range. The sharp eyes of Balakrama, however, noted small things too. Near the mountain streams he saw grass growing along the way, and in the dust prints made by the plodding feet of men and beasts traveling before them. One morning the princes reached the province of ancient Fars and left the desert. At once they purchased horses, leaving behind their camels to be bought by others going towards the east. Now the brothers could travel more swiftly, and before long they spied a mountain village far off. Even at a distance, however, they could see the dome of its temple on fire, and to the west, beyond the houses, plowed fields where farmers seemed hard at work. About the same time they overtook a small caravan which had halted on the road. In the midst of it a stocky camel leader in a brown and tattered tunic was asking questions and shouting orders. "I can see you are exceedingly busy," Balakrama said to him, "but pray tell me if you know the name of the village which lies ahead." The man replied with few words. "Kuhabad," he said, "people mostly poor, but kind to strangers." He seemed to have something else on his mind. Turning from the princes, he asked more questions and gave commands in a sharp voice. Then he began to wring his hands and spoke again to the 3 brothers. "Worthy gentlemen," he said, perhaps taking them but for merchants, "have you seen a wandering camel? One is missing from our number. We looked ahead, we looked behind, no camel." He flung out his hands. "Many caravans have we passed," Balakrama said, "but we have not seen a camel separated from his fellows. A long way back, however, I observed the footprints of such a creature. He was headed towards the east on a path but little traveled. Tell us, did yours lack the sight of one eye?" "Why, that he did," the leader said in amazement. "For a whole year he's seen with only one eye." "And had he also lost a tooth?" the oldest prince inquired. Indeed he had, answered the leader, his voice sounding more astonished than before. Then, apparently in too great haste even to thank Balakrama, he turned back to look again. For their part, the princes continued on toward the west. Their path lay upward between grassy slopes where wild tulips with blossoms of red and white swayed in the breeze. The time passed swiftly, and soon the three young men reached Kuhabad. Around it were farmlands where the villagers grew their food, and the princes saw young wheat plants which had pushed through the dark earth. The houses were made with bricks of hardened mud, and passing near the temple which they had glimpsed from a distance, the brothers saw a sacred fire burning within. Between the houses of Kuhabad ran narrow pathways to its center, where there was a small open space with a spring of water. Here blossoms of apricot and quince trees spilled their fragrance in the air. The princes had decided to ask in this village if anyone knew of Athanasius and his scroll. But they had arrived just as the celebration of a wedding was going forward, and the father of the bridegroom invited them to share in the happiness of the day. They had hardly begun to enjoy the company and to taste the feast of mutton, sweet melons, and rice, however, when the camel leader, bristling with rage, burst in upon them. "Look you," he said to the princes, "I have not found my camel, nor any sign of him." His dark eyes flashed with anger. "Why did you send me on an empty errand? You have played a wicked joke." Balakrama said, "I regret that you have not found the animal you seek, but I do truly believe I saw his traces. Was he not halt in one leg?" That he was, the leader said, again wringing his hands. "You describe my beast exactly." Then his eyes narrowed, and he spoke harsh words. "Since you know so much, you must have stolen him. Say quickly where he is, or I shall tell the emperor's guards. They will bring you to justice." When the princes protested that they had not taken nor even seen the camel, the leader rent the air with his fury. Not wanting to occasion further disturbance at the wedding, the three princes decided to proceed at once to Bishapur. Riding swiftly, they soon reached the imperial capital. Situated in a fair valley where date trees grew, it had straight streets, a high domed temple for its sacred fire, and a great palace. As soon as possible after they had arrived, the brothers set out to examine the magnificence all around. But they had little opportunity to do so, for they were just approaching the town's center for the first time, when suddenly an armed band of the emperor's guard blocked their way on every side. "Here are those camel robbers," its commander shouted. "In the name of the mighty Emperor Bahram, you shall go no farther." "But this is monstrous," Balakrama said. "I tried to help." "Silence!" the commander roared. Without being allowed even one more word, the three princes were arrested and taken off to a military garrison. Here, bound with chains, they were thrust into a damp and somber prison. And here's a two-page image of